let me answer any questions that you have. Yes, sir.
How can the states take charge of the public lands that are in the state, because the federal government has no authority in the Constitution to...
That's a really good point. We have a tremendous amount of land in Arizona and other western states that have been gathered in, commandeered, taken over, however you want to designate it, by the federal government. The states will have to draw a line and push that through the courts. Anytime the states disagree with the federal government, it's going to come down to a legal battle. And that's just the process that happens until we have Congress or representatives in Congress and in the Senate that are willing to change those conditions. So unless we have people in Washington that represent states' powers and understand what that means, that's not going to happen, and it will have to occur through legal interpretation and legal force based on pushing it through the court system. Okay. Next question. Yes, ma'am.
What's your background and where did you go to school?
My background, let me introduce you. This is my wife here on the side, standing there holding the camera. That's my wife, Jan. She and I are the parents of 9 children. We have 5 grandchildren. It's a blended family. My wife brought 5 children to our family. I brought 4 children. They've all lived in our home. We've taught all of them how to be productive members of society. Some are better at it than others. As parents will acknowledge and understand what that means. I have a high school diploma with some college. I come out of the private sector. I've been in a corporate setting working for a Fortune 1000 company up until about 3 years ago. I worked my way up until I was an executive within those corporations. I've worked in the outsourcing industry, serving a lot of major Global 100 types of organizations, and that was here in Arizona, and that was bringing jobs into Arizona. The company that I worked for brought sales, marketing, supply chain, various kinds of jobs into Arizona out of high-cost centers in other places in the country. So it's all private sector, business experience, no prior public office, never run for public office, none of those things. Okay. Oh, and you asked me where I went to school.
Yes.
I attended Brigham Young University for a short time. And then I picked up some trades skills along the way, computer programming, things like that. Another question? Yes, ma'am.
Did you abandon the Republican Party? And if so, why didn't you just run against McCain? None of us like McCain probably, but the fear of the Democrat winning, if it was to be divided, is more fearful to me than having McCain back in Washington again.
I understand that. I've been outside of the parties for more than a dozen years, so this isn't a recent phenomenon. This is a statement that I don't need the party to tell me what to do. I don't need them to tell me how to think, and I'm not really impressed by the things that they do when they're in power. So when I see either a D or an R and the same behaviors show up, more government, more encroachment, more loss of freedom, more taxation, etc., to me it's immaterial which party's in power. That's why I'm not in them. And I don't want the obligations that are expected in a federal office when you go to Washington. So as an example, when I see Sarah Palin coming here to stump for McCain, when I see Mitt Romney coming here to stump for McCain, when I see all of them going to Massachusetts to stump for Scott Brown, these are commitments to a party where they are trying to establish power base for that party. And frankly, that doesn't appeal to me, and running for the Senate, I have no desire to have those obligations.
But look what Ross Perot did, gave us Bill Clinton. And to me, you know, you strengthen the party instead of divide it. And so...
And I'll leave that to you to strengthen the party. As for me, I'm going to vote and act on principle. Yes, sir.
You know, when you came to speak to our group, I was kind of hard on you, and I was on her train of thought. And since then, I read George Washington, An Indispensable Man, and he was completely against parties. And in fact, parties were getting started, and he made a speech, and they went away. So I'm actually very glad you're doing that. I would like to see the parties go, because we're supposed to have separation of powers between the Senate and the House, or the judicial and the executive. And right now, our only separation is between Republican and Democrat. And so, thank you for doing that. But my question to you is, I asked this question, those are going to be in the legislature. Where in the Constitution, it's a very broad question, I'm not looking for anything specific, where in the Constitution does Congress get their authority?
Well, my understanding, and I don't claim to be a constitutional scholar, I read it, I study it, I can go find things when I need to find them. I believe that they receive their power from we the people. It's my basic understanding.
But it's set up in the legislative branch is set up, the executive
Yes.
branch is set up, the judicial.
That's correct.
It's in one of the articles.
That's correct. And when you look at the House versus the Senate, the House is intended to be tied to taxation and representing the people, and the Senate is intended to be tied to the states,
Yes.
representing the states.
Yes.
So when you look at how that is split, there is a check and a balance that occurs. I'm of the opinion that some of that check and balance has been lost because the senators are now looking for popular vote, just like the House of Representatives is. So when you go look at the 17th Amendment, personally I'm in favor of repealing that because it removes accountability to the state governments and to the state legislators. So I believe that the answer to your question is it comes from the people, and the states are intended to be represented by the Senate.
I was looking a little broader, you're correct, but I was looking a little broader, Article 1.
Okay. Yes. Yes, sir.
What is your understanding of the constitutional authority of the federal government to lay a federal income or other tax upon the heads of the people?
You're talking about the 16th Amendment. That's been a battle. It came into effect, I believe, around 1913 or so. So prior to that point, it was not based on an income tax. It was based, I'd have to go back and somebody will correct me, I think it was more on tariff and on consumption.
Tariffs.
Yeah. So historically, it would be ideal to go back to that original founding structure that the founding fathers had, and the income tax would disappear. However, where we are today with tax code, I'm in favor of a flat tax because I think it's easier to get to. And when we start talking about taxation today in a consumption tax, commonly called the fair tax, we have an enormous part of our economy that can show up offshore, outside of the bounds of this nation, and we would never see it. And what I mean by that is our digital economy, whether that's movies or books or audio or financial services or a whole variety of things that can be pushed on servers and transacted electronically that you'd never see within the confines of the U.S. proper. And the way to get around that is to now give control of the government to broadband, to the internet, so that they can then monitor, audit, and tax. And I'm not willing to do that. Okay. Yes, sir, next question.
In view of the flight of manufacturing and the making of goods to overseas out of the United States, do you favor imposing tariffs on these articles coming into the States? So
I think we have to look at that, yes. So the question is about tariffs and imposing so that we can level the cost of goods coming into the country based off of offshore manufacturing, etc. I think that can be part of the answer, and that would certainly show up in the Senate because it will be impacted. It will impact treaties and how we interact with other nations. So yes, we have to look at that. However, coming from the outsourcing industry and having some visibility there, one of the things we have to combine with that same discussion is the cost of labor. Today, cost of labor is so different in the U.S. than in other countries, and because supply chain, visibility, logistics, computer systems, etc. make it possible to manufacture anywhere on the planet, businesses are going to go offshore and obtain lower costs of labor unless we deal with that whole issue of the cost of labor here in the U.S. And there's a variety of ways that we need to deal with that. One is corporate taxation. It's at 35% today. So to lower that will mean the cost of doing business here will be less. Capital gains tax, we need to keep that low rather than raising it back up. And this is one where people are going to be unhappy, and yet it's not constitutional. Department of Labor. If we want to talk about lowering our cost of labor, then we have to start dealing with minimum wage laws that artificially inflate the cost of labor here in the United States so that the free market no longer competes, but rather it's inflated, it's bloated, we throw all kinds of benefits on top of it, and then we're no longer competitive from a cost structure.
Yeah, but the ones that's up there now, they just want to make us a third world country so that everything will be equal.
Understand, it's a difficult question and there's not an easy answer, and tariffs can be part of it, but we better deal with the cost of doing business here, including the cost of labor, if we're going to bring those manufacturing jobs back into the U.S.